Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein. Hello, everyone. Today on the show, we have a special guest, Erik Rojas. He is a professional with a background in personal development and real estate. For over a decade, Erik served as a program leader and senior staff member at Landmark Worldwide, the infamous and influential large group awareness training organization, where he led programs for thousands of participants across various offices nationwide. After finally coming to terms with what he says are the abusive practices of Landmark, Erik shifted his focus to building a family and pursuing entrepreneurial ventures. He entered the real estate industry and eventually established his own successful business, demonstrating that the same commitment and drive that marked his earlier career in Landmark could be used towards legitimate means. And today, after experiencing the grueling work life in Landmark, Erik values quality time with his family and balancing his work life with activities that bring joy and fulfillment, which I'm so happy about for him. Here's Erik now. I am so happy to be able to have Erik Rojas with me today, talking about a really, really, really important subject. And I know we'll get into a lot of the details, but welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm honored to be here.
I'm so glad to be able to have this conversation. And I'd love people to get to know you a little bit before we launch into your story. So can you let people know a little bit about you and what you do and kind of who you are, even separate from what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. My wife and I, we live in California, and we have a little 2-year-old little one, and she's, tons of energy. And so our life pretty much revolves around, parenting and such. And then outside of that, I do work in real estate. I'm a real estate agent, and as well, I run a small real estate development company here in San Diego and Santa Barbara. We do a lot of fix and flips, like luxury flips and fix and flips and such. And prior to going into real estate, I was somebody that participated heavily in the personal development space. Like I'll talk about, mostly it was at Landmark. That kind of captures a little bit about who I am.
All right. I'm also struck by hearing about having a little 2-year-old, which is quite adorable. And yeah, they're all over the place. I also think, in kind of a meaningful way, now that you are free from Landmark, you get to also probably spend the kind of time you want to spend with a child, with your child, in a way that you may not have been able to had you continued, in leadership positions there, or even from what I hear from people who are taking workshops and are missing significant dates in their family's life and in their own life. So I think it's really, the timing of it all is really meaningful. And, your little one is benefiting from you having that freedom to make those decisions on behalf of your family.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, having a family and being married was definitely not something that my life was. It wasn't something that I would have projected would have been in my life when I was heavily involved. I worked for Landmark when I was really young. And so you spend so much of your time there, 70, 80 hours a week plus. So having a family and being married wasn't something that happened regularly for a lot of people unless their spouse or significant other was also equally heavily involved.
Right. And so I wonder, when you say that you got involved when you were young, so was this something that your family was involved in, or you got involved on your own?
My uncle had participated in one of Landmark's programs in Mexico City years prior. And he was somebody that I really looked up to. You know, he's a very accomplished businessman, and somebody had shared the forum with him or told him about it. And he thought this could be good for his employees. So he went on and participated and did the Landmark Forum and went on and completed what they call his Landmark's curriculum for living, which is, a set of three courses. I was 15 at the time. I was kind of like trying to figure life out like most 15-year-olds are. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the future. I was going to go to college. Was I not going to go to college? I come from a family that's, well educated. I have engineers and teachers and dentists and doctors in my family. So it was kind of like expected that I'd go off and go to college and, kind of go down that path. But I just wasn't sure if that was really the path I wanted to take. And so my uncle says to me that, well, maybe you should do the Landmark Forum. It's something that can kind of uh, help you figure out what you want to do with your life. And so I did. I participated in Landmark Forum for teens when I was 15, and you do have to have your parents' consent. They have to sign it. So, my uncle's a very respected person in my family. He's, like I said, he's an accomplished businessman. He's an engineer. Like he's somebody that the family trusts, and he participated himself. So I go ahead and do it. I accelerated through Landmark's programs rather quickly. I came out of the Landmark Forum with so much zest for life. I was on that Landmark high that so many people talk about coming out of it. And I just wanted to continue to be on that Landmark high. And so I continued to participate for pretty much the rest of my high school years. I participated. And then when I was 18, I went into one of the Landmark offices and I said, I want to work here. This is the career that I want for myself and my life, is to lead programs here and to have my life be about Landmark's mission. So I'm from San Diego, and there wasn't an opening in San Diego. And kind of the way Landmark does things is they say they're about uniting you with your families, but when you get involved in some type of leadership role, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll place you in a location that's away from where you are. So they placed me in New Jersey, and that's where I started my Landmark employee working career, was in New Jersey. And my dad and I packed up the car, and that Landmark said to me that they had a limited budget to get me to New Jersey, but they needed me to get to New Jersey as quickly as possible. And they weren't going to fly me out there. They weren't going to ship any of my things. My relocation budget was basically just to drive myself cross country. So in about a week and a half time, my dad and I drove cross country, and then he dropped me off at the New Jersey office. And that's where my career on staff started.
Wow. And so tell us, when you say career on staff, I know that you know what that means and what that looks like, and the time commitment and the role that you're playing and all of it. But if you can give the listeners a flavor for what that means, sort of like a day in the life of that would be great.
Sure. Landmark has, up until about a year and a half ago, had people who volunteered their time. And then there was the people that were paid at Landmark. And the people that were paid at Landmark were employees and staff members. Most of the people are what Landmark calls the distinction of being a staff member. And a staff member is somebody who has constituted themselves as Landmark the enterprise, as Landmark the mission. And so a day in the life looks like a minimum. You're expected to work 62 hours a week, but more times than not, you end up working significantly more hours than 62 hours a week, because you come into the office at, say, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're there until 10, 11 o'clock at night, because Landmark has seminars that go on from 7 to 10. And much of the day to day, you basically work two shifts. So much of the day to day operations as a Landmark employee or as a Landmark staff member is to fill Landmark's courses. And an entry level position like myself, you're working with Landmark's current customer base. So most of the people that I'm interacting with are people who've already participated in their flagship course, the Landmark Forum. And, the goal is to call all of the people that have done the Landmark's flagship course and register them in more programs, more seminars and such. And you have a target to keep every single day. And so that's basically, the day is keeping those daily targets to keep the business running. And you're paid a very small salary, but somebody who's very young, somebody who's it's my first job coming out of high school, so I think making $30,000 a year is like great money because I've never been paid anything. But then you start breaking it down and you're working 80 hours a week and you realize you're not really making a lot of money.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So I wonder about when people run out of money, when they have nothing to live on anymore, if they're needing, I've heard of so many people really struggling. And there is, I think typically there's a real heartlessness about that. What are the responses? Like if someone, I don't know, first of all, if you feel like within the context of Landmark that you could even feel like you could say something, because that would be complaining, right? And being negative in some way or another, that would be called something that you're not supposed to be doing and being. But what would happen if you said, I just can't make this work. I'm really struggling. I'm really suffering.
That was the case, especially when I moved. Yeah, I'd be relocated to different locations where the cost of living was higher. I would have managers go out of their way to try to figure this out with me. Most of my time when I was living on the East Coast, I was renting a room for below market rent. And there were Landmark graduates who would rent out their rooms because they knew that we were so grossly underpaid. And the reasoning, the center manager would call these people and say, hey, Erik, he's looking for a place to live. Erik's like never home. He's in the center like most of the time. So he really just needs the bed to go to sleep in. I mean, I'm getting home at like 10:30 and I'm out of there by like 7 because I've got to go and get breakfast. And so I never had so there was like, I never had groceries in the house. I ate out all the time. And then on the weekends, I worked on Saturdays as well. And so really the only day that I was ever home was Sunday. And because I was so exhausted from working all week, I pretty much sleep all day on Sunday. And so, these people who were so generous to give up a space in their home for someone to, something that you would do for like a close friend who was really struggling, a close family member. But for a lot of these people, we were complete strangers. They didn't know who we were. All they knew was that we were somebody that worked for Landmark.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. I'm wondering also, just as you were doing this and the 60 some odd hours a week, and it probably even more, that just didn't get counted. I'm wondering what you were noticing just in terms of your own health or mental health as this was happening. And then I want to hear, of course, more about your experiences there.
Yeah, I mean, my diet was, super unhealthy, eating out all the time and unhealthy food. And there was like no exercise to be had because you were in the office most of the time. Most of the people that I worked with had dealing with all sorts of health issues. And it was almost like people wore it as a badge of honor, They had this health issue, but, they were doing something that was for a bigger mission, where they were making a difference. They were transforming the world. In terms of my mental health, I didn't really start to realize anything with regards to my mental health until later on, which is kind of when I started to realize that I probably didn't want to be here long term. But there was an element of it that was fun for me when I was 18. I had a lot of energy, but I mean, there's no way that I would have been able to sustain that kind of long-term career there. Like some of the people that had been, that they called themselves lifers, and they would tell me, "Oh, Erik, you're going to be a lifer. You're going to be like me. I started here when I was really young, and here I am, 30 something years later, and I'm still here, and you're going to have this big role, and you're going to be this big senior manager, big senior director and leader here. You just have to keep doing the work." And so I was, excited that that could be me, because that was the career path that I thought that was for me.
Right. Incredible. And I wonder also about just hearing more about how you kind of moved up the ranks, and because you were very devoted, and I think they saw in you someone who could give a lot of enthusiasm and energy and would be a good recruiter and et cetera, and motivational.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a top recruiter there, and frequently kept my targets. They call them targets. Frequently kept my targets to keep the programs running. Would sell programs out all the time, and I did. I moved. The way you moved up in that company was it, and the way, and I don't know for a fact, but Landmark's gone through so many different reinventions over the years. It's kind of their shtick. In fact, they're going through another one right now. And, they identify their key players, and they continue to have you move up the ranks, or as they say, they want you to be up to something bigger than you know yourself to be. So you're frequently getting promoted, and if you're producing the results.
Right. Okay. So I mean, it's interesting. Targets. When you get into this kind of language of people being targets of, right, like they're reduced to things that you claim, to achievements, something that keeps your kind of stats up, it gets cold, and you can feel, right, really driven, and it gets very businessy. Not so much about human development, it feels at times like you're really driven. So I'm curious about that. What were the targets, and how many numbers, and what are we looking at?
Landmark centers in North America have mostly shut down. Actually, I should say they have completely shut down. Everything is mostly online. So there are no longer centers or offices. Everything's virtual. But when there were offices, you would walk into a center, and you would interact with Landmark staff, and everyone wears different badges, and the different colors of badges represent like the different ranks that you have. So Landmark staff would wear these like white badges, and it said staff on it. It had your name and Landmark's logo. So you interacted with us. And when you interacted with us, there was always like this positive attitude, we're transforming the world, blah, 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 right? But behind the scenes, behind closed doors, it was all about these targets. And so, depending on the department that you were in charge of, had a whole set of pathways to keep those targets. And Landmark's business model is completely built on people recruiting people. So the Landmark does not have any sort of business model outside of bringing guests and registering them into programs, or having graduates register other graduates into programs. That's their only business model. And so we'll just use the Landmark Forum because that's the flagship, right? You have home introductions, you have the leaders, what's now the Leaders Training Academy, I believe, but it used to be the Introduction Leaders Program. And these people are getting trained to be leaders, but the platform that they're using is bringing guests and registering people in their life. And somewhere in that process, in them bringing guests and registering people in their life, they're going to discover that the breakthroughs that need to be had with their leadership in their life is going to happen by them bringing guests and registering people in their life. So any contact that you have with anybody, a graduate or landmark prospect is a contact. And you need to have so many contacts per day, whether it be with graduates or people that have never participated. And that was your entire day. And if you didn't keep those contacts and if you didn't keep those targets, there was going to be serious consequences. So that's basically what it was like working there.
Wow. Okay. So the pressure and daily, that means 7 days a week?
So you have to 7 days a week. There was a target to keep 7 days a week. Even when you were off, you had a target to keep, and you had to report hourly on the hour on the results that you had produced that hour.
Whoa. And report to whom?
Report to your manager, which the center manager, who would then report to their center's division director, who was managing multiple centers, who would then report to Joan Rosenberg, who was in charge of all the centers, about what was happening in the center. So you had these reports you had to fill out every hour. This is how many people I spoke to. These are the people I spoke to. Here was the outcome of that conversation. Here's my next follow-up date and such. So we had binders of people's names on there and who they were sharing with and who they were talking to. And I talked to so-and-so, and they're going to be speaking to so-and-so's mom and so-and-so's uncle and so-and-so's coworker. And then I spoke to this person and that person's going to speak to. And so a lot of your job was about managing these people, then going out and speaking to the people they said they were going to speak. And eventually, if you had spoken to enough people and you had told enough people about who they were going to register, you would start to see those people coming in and registering or signing up.
Okay. Well, I have so many questions. Okay. Well, one is just, I mean, if we can just imagine, so the people you're reporting to have all these people who are reporting to them, and then they need to report to other people. And I don't know how you do anything else during the day because there's no way to focus. I mean, if every day is punctuated every hour by you needing to do this, it's like, well, about having a child. I remember, and then I'll come back to what I was going to say. I remember when I was first pregnant, I went to a lactation consultant, or it was through the local hospital. And she said, oh, you're going to be up and nursing, a few times a night. And I thought, okay, I can handle that. And then she said, and it's not just nursing. You need to then burp them, change the diaper, like it's a whole hour, hour and a half, a couple times a night. And I started laughing, thinking, she must be joking. That's, not, is she crazy? And that is what it was, because it's not just the phone call or the reporting that you need to do every hour. That takes time. You have to give information and type it all out or say it all out and synthesize it and make sure that you've written it down. And so there really isn't a way to do anything else also that might take any modicum of concentration for more than a few minutes at a time. So it becomes your whole life. And then you were talking about these great consequences. If you don't do this, what were the consequences?
So I think the consequences varied from person to person. It was anything from being yelled at for not keeping those targets or those contact targets, to having you sit in an office with the door closed and getting processed to until you confessed something that was could be potentially interfering with you keeping those targets. There's this whole theory that if your integrity was out, that somehow wasn't having people sign up to do the forum. And your integrity could have been anything. It could have been the check engine light in your vehicle has been on and you haven't told anybody about that. It could have been you had a thought that you wanted to quit. You hadn't told anybody about that. So it could have been anything. And then there were instances like for myself, I had a manager who was physically abusive and would close the door and shut the blinds and would punch me in the arm. And I'd go home and I'd have bruises on my arm because we hadn't kept the target that day. To this person would strangle me in the office with the blinds closed, and why aren't we going to keep this target? Like, we've kept the target, now we're not going to. So there were people like that who were abusers and who would do that. So it just depended on who the manager was in that particular location. But it all started at the top with the vice president, right? Joan Rosenberg, who is Werner Erhard's sister. And she, you would hear her on calls yelling at the center managers about why their targets weren't getting kept. And then those center managers would go to their employees and deal with them about why they weren't keeping. And, this company's going to go under because of you. So it's a lot of threats, a lot of yelling. You would get put on warnings. You could get fired for not keeping, even if it was an hourly target, you get written up for that. There was grave consequences for not keeping those targets. And it didn't matter if you'd been there just 6 months or if you had been there for 20 years, the consequences were the same.
Incredible. And so with being punched in the arm, with being strangled, then there's, I'm assuming, nothing that you can do about it. There's nobody to talk to, no one to complain to. And are you also told to keep it under wraps? I mean, what happens after that?
So firstly, what I want to say about that is it didn't register as abuse, which is like a major that now I'm realizing how dangerous it is to be involved in an organization like this that has such high control. I didn't register that until years later. I mean, I've stopped participating years ago, but when Ann Peterson wrote her book, Is This a Cult? And people started speaking out, I realized, wait a second, I wasn't the only person that experienced something like this. And then it registered. That was abuse. But I did say something about it. So Landmark has this thing about you can get anything resolved in communication. So if something happens and you can't get it resolved with your manager, you go to your manager's manager. And if it doesn't get resolved, you go to your manager's manager, all the way up to the board of directors. At least that's what they say. So this was kind of towards the end of my tenure at Landmark. I was kind of done, and I was realizing that I didn't see myself here long term. I wanted to get married. I did want to have a family. I started to realize that maybe the money I was making wasn't all that great. I was asking for a raise at every opportunity I could. And, I was either getting denied or I was getting a small raise, which meant more responsibilities and such. So in this instance, this manager, I did report him. I reported him to Joan Rosenberg, which is the vice president of the centers. And, it was what I was told to do was to get this complete with my manager in the office with this manager and with Joan. And there was a centers division director there. And, we were to forgive each other. He was to forgive me for what I had done, not keep those targets. And I was to forgive him for not, for him doing what I did. And then to go further, I needed to deal with myself for what it was in me. Who was I being that had this individual think it was okay for them to put their hands around me? So that's how it was addressed. And then I went on and, I was leaving and I went on to say, this person needs to be let go. This person, it shouldn't be here. And I made it kind of like my mission to have this person gone. But because I was already on my way out, I wasn't listened to. And this individual was later transferred to a later location and went on to sexually assault another employee, at which point they were terminated. That's how this was handled. And that's how it was usually handled at Landmark. It was always put on you, why it was that you were the one that was abused, not the other way around.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm writing this down because this is so disturbing, and it is at the crux of so much of what happens that we talk about here on the podcast. But people who have been in relationships with malignant narcissists, people who have been raised in fundamentalist groups, and large group awareness trainings, multi-level marketing, you have to look inward. Same thing with Scientology. You have to look inward and see what you did to bring this in, which is the Scientology thing, right? But Landmark and Scientology are so intertwined. And you have to figure out why you were the one being abused. It's not dissimilar from when, women are asked, well, what were you wearing? Right. You must have been kind of wanting it or inviting it in some way or needing it in some way. And it is a very dangerous situation when there isn't a clear sense about who the perpetrator is. And then that they then are in a system that will support them as perpetrators. And if they just have this proclivity, they'll just keep pushing it and see how far they can take it. So I'm not at all surprised that he tried to get away with more, or maybe he tried to get away with those things before, but now suddenly, he got caught. But that the whole system, like talking about integrity, I mean, it's so ironic that you were the one who was being questioned in terms of your integrity, or someone who didn't keep, their numbers up. We're supposed to be questioned about their integrity. But a person who strangles someone else doesn't get questioned about their integrity. It's really unbelievable. Victim blaming over and over and over again, which is very confusing to anyone, but especially someone who's young and just starting out.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this many times. If anybody ever tried to do that to me today, it would be like that just not happen. You don't put your hands on me. But I was young then, I was in my early 20s. So, and all I had known for years was Landmark. I was in it for the mission, right? And so it was almost like it was acceptable to be treated that way because you had been treated poorly in so many different ways in different locations prior to. So, obviously it's happened to others, and there are others who pursued legal action against Landmark, and some of those individuals can't speak anymore because they settled out of court with Landmark, so they can't speak. And so that's another reason why I'm speaking up, because this does happen. And some of these people can't speak about what's happened because of it.
Right. And it's if it's for like personal development, right? Large group awareness training. What are you becoming aware of? That there's this system suddenly that you're in that is not built to protect you, but to use you and to kind of make you second guess yourself and make you very confused. What happened after this? Because I'm sure this made a big impact on you.
Well, I left. I left shortly after. I had been promoted to be what they call a trainer. So I was training other employees to perform and produce results in their whatever their departments were, specifically in the department of what we would call customer retention in outside of Landmark terms, but it was basically, ensuring the people that were participating were continuing to participate. And so that was kind of what my final role was. I was heavily involved in Landmark's previous redesign in this arena. Landmark's, like I said, frequently redesigning and reinventing what they're about, their mission, who they are, and their approach. So when this happened, that was kind of like my last straw, and I left. And then I spent like 2 years trying to figure out what it was that I had just been through. Because when you're gone, you go out into the real world and you realize that all of those 80-hour weeks. Now you have all of this time and you're realizing, oh my goodness, I have all of this time. And there's like, so I got the most unstressful job you could ever think that summer. I did an athletics camp at the Boys and Girls Club. And that was like the most fun, not stressful job ever. And I decided I was going to go back to school, and there was all these things that I decided I was going to do, and I would go on to continue to participate at Landmark for a couple years thereafter. The wife of a very senior leader at Landmark would later go on to become like a business and life mentor of mine. And I got to witness other things that senior leadership and executives kind of how they interact with their staff. And then in 2020, I interviewed to come back on staff for a world headquarters position. Landmark was really struggling financially, through the pandemic, and they were really dealing with what they were going to do with their offices because they weren't conducting any programs. So I was going to take over their real estate department. I would later go on to decline that opportunity or that position, and that was the last time I actually spoke to anyone at Landmark was in 2020. So I've kind of built a whole life around not Landmark. My wife has never participated in any of Landmark's programs. In fact, whenever we've talked about it, she's like, that sounds kind of weird. Like, you did that? Because she's never participated in any kind of seminar or large group training or anything like that. So for her, that's probably the healthiest thing I could have done, was to marry someone who doesn't speak like this. And so with that came business colleagues that don't talk Landmark, that the jargon, that friends that aren't involved. And so I kind of built this whole life with normal, not that Landmark people aren't normal, but you know what I mean? Like that I wasn't
mainstream
involved with all these Landmark leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Okay, so a couple things come to mind, and I know there's so much more to your story too, but I want to get a sense of what Landmark ease sounds like. And I know, it had its origins as Est and then the Forum and now Landmark, but the lexicon has remained pretty similar throughout the ages. And there's so much about it also that is ironic, like the integrity piece and how that's weaponized. And it only applies to certain people. And so if you can kind of give us a sense of like if we were to enter into the country of Landmark, what do the people speak like? Give us some examples. And then I want to go back to when you were able to hear about the executives and how they were being treated and what you got a behind the scenes glimpse as. So go ahead.
So at Landmark, when you're in it, the conversations are always about, you're either having a casual conversation or you're having a committed conversation. And usually most of the conversations you're having are about what you're creating, what you're discovering for yourself. They're about the future. You having these like deep conversations about life all the time. I mean, it's like every conversation's like this deep and profound conversation. And rarely you're having some, casual conversation, as they would call it, because casual conversations are for like ordinary people. Extraordinary people at Landmark, they don't have conversations like that. They have conversations that are deep and profound. And so that's kind of what it looked like. And if anyone was not having a type of conversation that was, forwarding or creating anything, you would call people out on it. If somebody started to talk the way normal people speak, you would call them on it. The thing at Landmark is precision is everything. And so the way you speak has to be very precise. The words that you choose have to be very, very precise. Because if you say something that isn't precise, somebody is going to call you on it. And so that's kind of what the Landmark speak looks like.
Interesting. Okay, so what are some examples of some of the phrases? And also, how would you call someone out on something?
So I would say something like, Rachel, I woke up this morning and I realized that I have this 2-year-old daughter and she has this whole bright future ahead of her. And who I'm creating myself to be today is the possibility of being a loving, caring, generous father. And in creating that, I realized that what's inauthentic about that is that deep inside, I think I'm not really good enough for her, that I don't think I'm the best father that I could be for her. And when I started to think about that, I realized that maybe there was some healing that needed to happen with my parents. Because, growing up, my dad, he worked all the time and my mom was home with us. And I never really had that relationship with my dad. And so I didn't have that relationship with him until I was older. And so, kind of having realized that, that's why I'm creating the possibility that I'm creating for myself. And I want you, Rachel, to hold me to account. If you see me not being that possibility with my daughter today, I want you to call me on it. And I want you to remind me of the conversation that we had today.
Wow. Wow. That is intense.
Yeah. So you're having these conversations with people all the time. And then after that, you see, I'm going to go share that with, and you would say, Eric, that's so inspiring. I'm just like so inspired what you just shared. Now, who are the 3 people you could go share this with and tell them about the Landmark Forum? And then I'd go and I'd say, oh, I'm going to go share. Oh, yeah. I'm going to go share that with the guy at the grocery store today. And I'm going to share it, I'm going to go have a conversation with my dad. And I'm going to complete this with him for the 1,000th time, you know? And so you call these people in your life or the grocery store and they look at you like you're absolutely crazy, you know? But for you, you had those 3 conversations and you can call your coach or your committed listener or your friend and you can say, I had these 3 conversations and I'm so inspired by who I am. I'm moved, I'm touched, I'm inspired.
Okay. So I find that so interesting because you can see, on the one hand, you can see the appeal of that. That feels like in the rest of the world, people are just talking about superficial things, which is a huge, sweeping overgeneralization, I realize. But if that has been your experience in your life, that you don't get to talk about deep things, that you then look forward to being able to really be open and to find out about you. The part that then becomes problematic is manyfold here, which is that you're going to lose sight of typical social interaction and social rules. A lot of times, people initially, when they got involved in EST, they would be dropped by friends and sometimes family because they became like bulls in a china shop. And everything was a way to get to a deeper thing or to hold someone accountable, like you're saying, and to change the conversation to something very personal and to keep going with it as a means of really doing PR for the group. And someone is just, you're just buying eggs from them at the supermarket and they just kind of want to go on to the next customer. And you can kind of lose sight of how to navigate the world and when it's okay to share these things, when it's not, when it makes you look a certain way, when it doesn't, because you might just feel so driven to share this all the time and might need to report back on who you shared it with or how many people you shared it with. And so you're in this different kind of social dynamic and you're gonna have conflict and it's not gonna fit in so many places at the same time that you're talking about yourself and maybe getting something from it. But you're also talking to someone who's not a mental health professional. So they can agree with you and they can validate what you're saying. but it could be that you're off base. And they're just saying that was really deep and that seemed really important. So go share that with other people. But they're not qualified to say, actually, that's not something you need to worry about, or whatever. That you don't get actual feedback that is real.
Yeah. And, you'd have those conversations with, like, let's say people in the seminar or people, friends of yours. But I think where it gets really dangerous is when you start sharing this with your manager, your committed listener, and then they begin to use what you said against you. So, hey, Erik, you remember when you shared with me about you not being good enough for your daughter? Well, maybe that's getting in the way of you keeping that registration target. Maybe you're not being that possibility you said you were gonna be with your daughter. Where's your integrity out there? And so, you share openly about something that may be really important to you. Even if you just share it, just to share it, just to in that moment, because you're tired of having this conversation with your manager, your committed listener, and you've been in their office for an hour and they're just like digging and digging and digging, trying to get you to say something. So you just say something, but then it gets used against you. And I think that's really where it gets dangerous.
Right. It is dangerous. And it can make you feel like such a fool that you trusted, that you opened up, that you did what you were supposed to do. And in the moment, were given positive reinforcement for it, not knowing it was going to be weaponized.
Yeah. Or sometimes you're given advice or you're told to do something that person really, like you said, has no training in. These managers and committed listeners, they're not licensed. They have no training whatsoever to deal with any kind of life circumstances that an individual may be sharing with them that's like deep. And so they're telling you what to do and how to go about handling this in your life by using Landmark's tools and methodology. It's frowned upon to think that you should go address what you're dealing with the therapist or something. You should just go do the form again because in 3 days you can handle this.
Incredible. Okay. And so what else? I mean, when you think about your experience, and then I want to hear about after leaving and just dealing with the after effects. But what other things do you remember from your time in there that really have stood out to you?
I think we talked about the kind of the pressure of being there. When I left, I started to realize there was no way that I could have the life that I wanted to have being there, even though I was told that I could have the life that I wanted by being there. And I started to realize that if I didn't leave, I was going to miss out on a lot of things. I had already missed out on life up until then. I had missed out on life, on family events. I could only travel to visit my family 2 times a year in the summer and in the winter because, you only have so many days off. And even still, when I was off, I was working because I was preparing to lead a seminar or a program or whatnot. And before I would spend time with my family, I had to create my vacation or my time off. And I had to come back and report what I had done. And I remember one time I went to visit some family and some friends, and we had gone out drinking. Like, we were young 22-year-old guys, and we had gone to the beach, and we were just going to go party. And that was such an integrity issue. What if a graduate would have seen me, at a bar? And, this is like stuff that I missed out on that I look back and I'm like, stuff that college kids do when they're, away at college or something. So I looked out into my future and I was like, if I continue, I'm going to miss out on a lot of things in life. And sadly, there are people who were there for a lot longer than I was who did miss out on a lot of things in life. And they've shared this with me. And it's one of the dangerous things about being involved in an organization that's so high control that demands so much of your time all the time.
It also then remains your whole focus, which I guess that's part of the reason that they've had so much success, that they get people so driven to be committed to it, to keep it going, to spread the word, and that they're going to be given a hard time unless they do that. It's just constant pressure.
I think there's a certain type of person that they're looking for. It's my opinion, right? But having worked there, they start grooming people to be leaders there when people start participating. The people that share a lot, the people that bring guests, we would have names on a sheet of paper of like, oh, that person's going to be a great leader. And a lot of times they're young. And those are the people that end up working for Landmark because they're looking for something. They're looking for community. They're looking for a sense of purpose. And they have some sort of influence in their communities because they bring people. And so Landmark sees those people as good opportunities, good people to bring in to be leaders, to grow the business. And not only that, but it's someone that would be willing to give 80 something hours a week and move cross country to work for this mission. Now, they have had success, but they are really struggling now financially. I mean, I receive letters from Landmark because I am a vested shareholder, and they're not doing so well. So I know that things are changing. They're trying to keep the company going, but they're not. They haven't been doing great. They've been battling lawsuits after lawsuits for years, employment lawsuits, and the pandemic really was a big thing. They chose not to go back online. They lost millions of dollars, but they're trying to turn this ship around by rebranding again. They're trying to do like a Landmark Worldwide New Era is their new thing. And their new era is to deliver programs strictly online, subscription based, and to deliver the forum strictly online, but it's not having the same kind of impact that it used to have because they don't have the high that one would have on the third day. So participation levels continue to be at all-time lows. I have this theory that at this point, it's really just about preserving Warner's name and his legacy. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's now a strictly online company. And they do deliver some in person, but not much.
Okay. Interesting. Going back to tie to Scientology, one of their major publications and publication businesses is called New Era. And it's just like this keeps going, just the connection, right? Wow. It's so for people in the field, like, it's just so transparent. But yeah, so the rebranding, what you hope is that they're going to be integrating what they've now learned about how they should treat people and how if they're guiding people to not be victims in their lives and be out there in the world and be strong, that they should be supporting that strength by how they treat people. But unless you hear them say, our bad, sorry, whoa, okay, we got this, and we feel really bad and we're going to change things, and here we go, here's the proof of that, then it'll just be the same thing, different packaging. And so I don't know, what do you think it's going to be like?
I think they're trying to sweep all of this under the rug like it never happened. And they're telling people that this is the new era. So I was there in 2009 when they rebranded, and it was supposed to be a new Landmark. Landmark Education was the thing of the past, and now it was Landmark Worldwide. And now it's Landmark Worldwide New Era. They're going to try to sweep this under the rug like all of hasn't happened, like all the lawsuits that haven't happened. I think it's a way for them to control what's happened in the centers because so much of the abuse and exploitation did happen in their offices and in the centers. So by them going online, I think they can have a little more control over what happens and who witnesses it. And by having a smaller staff, I think there's only like 20 something people employed in the United States now, where it was, hundreds previously, just different packaging.
Wow. Right. I'm wondering also, just in terms of different packaging, here you have Werner Erhard, who was not originally named Werner Erhard. So he already repackaged himself. And right. And so it's from the core of it. What do you know about his involvement still? Because I know he he had to kind of disengage, and he was out of the country, I think Japan or other places for a while. What's he up to from what you can see?
So, I'm not privy to a ton of information about what he's up to. When I was participating, Warner wasn't around. In fact, in our we had these what they called corporate questions and answers, which was if anybody ever asks you about Warner Earhart, here's how you respond. And you had to memorize it word for word how you responded. And, it was all about Werner Earhart is, I'm just, summarizing, but I don't even remember how to respond anymore, but he's this great thinker and our work and methodologies based on his ideas. He has no financial involvement, which we all know now we know it's a bunch of bull because he was receiving significant monetary compensation depending on how Landmark was doing. And then obviously he started to get more involved over the years after my departure. I don't know a ton of where he's at. I know he's not in the US. I believe he's in the Cayman Islands, but I don't know for a fact.
Okay, so it's so interesting. So going back to something that you just said, and this is why doing this kind of work, and now with you doing this work, because you're learning so much about how these systems operate, right? And just from experiencing it yourself, but also going through your own healing and also being able to talk about it, you need to have a certain amount of information about it. I have learned not to take certain things at face value. And if someone says, like going back to Scientology, if they say, oh, I know how to handle this, right? That means I know how to disconnect basically from that situation. I know how to handle my parents means I know how to not talk to them again. So I've learned that when people say certain things to ask what that means, because you might be translating it in a mainstream way, but it doesn't mean that in the group. And so just when you were talking about this corporate question and answer, what that usually means is that you get to ask your questions and they will give you your answer. Not if someone else asks a question, here's what you have to say, here's the script. How is that Q&A? That is not at all. That's just how we do damage control out in the public eye, right? So different.
Yeah, because if you're someone who looks up Warner or Landmark, you know that anything that's published online isn't true because what's true is how you've been told to respond in that corporate questions and answers packet.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so I know we're running short on time, unfortunately, very unfortunately. So what else did you want to make sure to talk about, and also with your, the healing process? Go ahead.
Well, it's been so good to heal from all of this. Like I had said, I've been out of all of this, and it's been really. I haven't participated in as many sessions with you, Rachel. I think I was only in like one or two sessions, but which have been great. And it's important for people to deconstruct, I found, and it's important for people to have informed consent, which has kind of been my big thing now. And because exploitation and abuse doesn't just happen at Landmark, it happens in a lot of places. Landmark's like the cult for normal people, because they have like programs and stuff like that. So like the normal person's impact is like people to be proud that, well, if I'm in a cult, I'm in a great cult, that's kind of what people would say. But it happens everywhere. It happens in business. I was recently telling a friend of mine that I had to cut ties with the business partner because they felt like I was being taken advantage of. And I started looking into it and I was being taken advantage of. And so it's like, if you don't deal with what you've experienced, if I have not dealing with what I experienced, it then trickles on into other parts of my life, I found. And so knowing that I've been through this and then doing the work to heal can save me enormous amount of pain in the future for sure.
Okay. And so I wonder and I'm so glad that you are on this side of it now. And And also now you get to really throw yourself into your life and make decisions and also have things be very tangible because there is an immediate and kind of obvious and tangible outcome that you get from spending time with your spouse, resting, playing with your child. And when you go back to feeling that you were saving the world somehow by making these hourly reports, right? Where did it get the world? Where did it get you? And what are the takeaways from that have any kind of practical application? And it can start to feel after a while like, why am I doing this? And to what end, basically? But here you get to really see the results of your work and the healing that you're doing for yourself. And I'm sure it just feels nice and real.
Yeah, it does. And when I left, one of the things that I was told was that I was now going to go live an ordinary life, that my life was no longer going to be extraordinary because I wasn't a Landmark staff member, because I wasn't working there, because I wasn't there to make a difference. And I'll tell you, I will take my ordinary life today over any, quote, extraordinary life that I had when I was on staff. I'll take my slow evenings having dinner with my family over being in an office, registering, signing people up into a course. I'll take, hanging out by the pool on a Saturday over stressing about I haven't kept the weekend target. Being late. I'll take being late for to a party or to an event over stressing that I'm going to be late and I'm going to, even if it's just a 1 or 2 minutes late, because I'm going to get dealt with. So I'll take my ordinary life over that extraordinary life any day.
I love that. That's beautifully said. I do think that whole idea of an extraordinary life and that they decide within that you're going to have an extraordinary life. Really, it seems that that's also sort of from the mind of a narcissist. Like you can feel it,
Well, and that they get to decide that for you,
Right? And this is what I want and this is how I need to feel. And so this clearly is the best thing and what everyone wants and needs. And so this is going to be the goal here and the promise here.
Yeah.
But really, I think everyone being these worker bees, they're giving only the leadership, the top, an extraordinary life, right?
Exactly.
That's it. So I'm so glad to be able to speak with you. I'm so glad that you are past those experiences. And I understand you wanting to kind of, even after you left, kind of get back into it and still learn from it and do all of that. I mean, that makes sense. If something is 100% awful, you don't stay even for a minute. There had to be some things that you got and that you might have missed. But I think that at what cost? That's always my question. Like, okay, right?
Yeah.
You get these nuggets, but at what cost? And sometimes the cost is just way too great in very deep ways. Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Erik.
Well, I was just going to say, I've realized that like who was great was me.
Oh.
I was great all along and I would have been great no matter where I would have been, Landmark or anything. They just used my greatness and exploited it. That's all that happened there.
Oh, how interesting. Right. Right. So now you want to use your good qualities, your strengths for people who deserve it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
One more thing before you go. Thank you to Erik for being able to come on the show and talk about these very, very difficult experiences. It's quite incredible to hear how people live through so much that's traumatizing in every way, and then turn things around and become a resource
for others, and just while they're dealing with trying to heal themselves and trying to make sense of it. When you get involved in an organization where you're told you're going to be able to make your life better, and by moving up the ranks and helping others, you're going to be able to make other people's lives better, it is an incredible thing. You feel that it's a gift, and it should be. It should be what it says it is, because wouldn't that be wonderful? And wouldn't it be wonderful if the people who corral you into groups like this were able to be honest about it? In some organizations, yeah, you can do great work. And in others where it is run like a business, where you get the feeling that, like in Erik's situation, they care about the sacrifice you're willing to make and how much you're willing to suffer. As Erik talked about, that it was a badge of honor to suffer for the quote-unquote betterment of the world. I mean, think about that. It's not necessary to suffer for the betterment of the world. It's especially not necessary to do that if what you get back is just more suffering, that you don't ever get to sit back and say, oh, look what I've done and look how I've helped people, because the people you help in these organizations sometimes are also suffering because of the way you're interacting with them, the way you've learned to interact with them. When you become a senior staff member at an organization, that should come with respect. And it should come with you having worked hard to get to that point where then you're given a sense that now you can sit back a little bit and you can rest and you can relax. But no, the pressure is constant and the pressure is ongoing and the pressure just increases over time until some people tell me they break. What's also really, really difficult is that a group like this is supposed to be your new community, your new friends. But sometimes, especially if you're mistreated physically, you get the reminder that this really can't be your community. These can't be your friends because you can't trust them. What I've said about groups like this and others is that if the leadership could get out of the way, and some people quote me on this, the leadership could get out of the way, you would have well-meaning, lovely people, by and large, who know how to treat each other, who want to treat each other well, who might think that their role is to be a cheerleader and to get you going and to get you motivated, but not with cruelty and not with you needing to make sacrifices in your life, missing out on moments, missing out on taking care of yourself physically, psychologically, and that people there are going to be understanding, right? If the leadership can get out of the way, that if you are having a psychological issue, that you get support for that. If you're having a medical issue, you get the medical help you need. If you're exhausted and you need to rest, you're falling asleep at the wheel, you are not able to spend any time with your family because you're too tired and you can't run around with your children, people who care about you will say, I'm so sorry. It seems like you're getting worked too hard. Things can wait. What matters is you here. What matters is your family. What matters is these moments that you can't get back. But there's no room for that in this organization and many others like it. There's no room for you. And remember that. You matter. And it's not selfish to think that you matter. I talk a lot about how within cultic groups, self-care is called selfish. And so people go without tending to themselves. They no longer think they are important. And their health is important and their mental health is important, but it always is. And unfortunately, people leaving these groups, associations, workshops, cultic groups, hold on to that notion and have a very hard time resting, have a very hard time giving themselves permission to take care of their basic needs. But one of the basic needs that people have is being able to share, being able to talk. It's good to have a friend. It's good to have a sibling. It's good to have a parent who you feel like you can go to. It's good to have a partner who you can entrust with your information. But within the landmark framework, you are told to open up about your feelings all the time. But what happens then makes people really regret that they trusted the organization, that they trusted the people within it. Often when people open up here, the information is used against you. If you're saying, I think I'm done here, if you're saying, I don't really think the way I'm intervening with people and the way I've learned to intervene with people is actually helping them, I think it's hurting them, that's going to be used against you. But these are all important pieces of information and they should be respected. If an organization is a healthy organization, it wants to learn from you. It wants to hear that you're thinking that the guidebook that they've given you, that you've learned, that you've memorized for how to help people in their life is actually potentially hurting other people. They would want to know that if they cared. Thank you so much for letting me know. We had no idea. We haven't put it into practice. You see it, close up. And it's making people potentially suffer. It's making people have breakdowns. Thank you for this information. We will change what we're doing. I don't think anyone in Landmark has ever said that. I don't think anyone in Landmark has ever heard that. And so there are a lot of people who leave this group having these moral injuries. They feel like they participated in something that's wrong. So as soon as you start to feel that something you're saying to guide other people, to instruct other people, seems to not be helping them but maybe hurting them, then you want to do something about it. And if you're in an organization where you bring that to their attention and they say, that means you're doing it wrong, or you're teaching it wrong, or stop whining and stop complaining and you need to get over that, what they're saying is, we don't care. And you want to hear that loud and clear. Because usually when people get involved in an organization like Landmark, it's because of how much they care. Take good care. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.